All right. First and foremost, I want to again express my deepest condolences to the families and friends and all of those affected by this senseless act of violence. Our hearts go out to them during this unimaginably difficult time. As I said when I addressed the media on the 4th of July, all of us here today are fully committed to finding answers to what happened before, during, and after these killings so that our community can heal from the trauma of this event and find some peace in knowing that justice will prevail. I also ask for your patience and understanding as we work through this investigation, and I thank you for doing just that. Our investigators have worked tirelessly to piece together evidence and analyze all available information. And during the course of that investigation, we now know that the timeline of the defendant's actions stretched back to early Sunday morning, July 2nd, with the murder of Mr. Joseph Wama, Jr. Based on the evidence that was received, we have been able to determine that Philadelphia police received one 911 call at approximately 2:00 a.m. on the morning of July 2nd, 2023. This call reported gunshots in the area of 1600 South 56th Street, approximately 90 minutes after it is believed that Mr. Wama was murdered. This call was dispatched, however, to the 1600 block of North 56th Street in the 19th Police District, several miles away. There, responding officers surveyed the block and neighbors for a report of shootings or gunshots. Police did not find evidence that a shooting had taken place at that location. The responding 19th District officers requested a callback to the original 911 caller, but I will abstain from providing the details of that interaction as they are currently under internal investigation and it is still early. However, what I will say is that during this very active and still ongoing investigation, we will seek to determine the why and the how this happened, and also to see if any and all policies and procedures were followed. And to be clear, even if we do not uncover any policy or procedural violations and determine that this was a case of human error, it's our responsibility to determine what fail-safes can be implemented in order to mitigate the chances of something like this ever happening again. We are fully committed to learning from this incident and improving our response mechanisms to ensure the safety and security of our communities. Before I turn it over to DC Vanore to provide additional details about how we were able to determine this new timeline, I want to again emphasize that our focus remains on the victims, their families, and everyone who is impacted or has been affected by this heinous act of this offender, or heinous acts of this offender. I also stand by my original statement surrounding the incredible work of the officers who responded to the mass shooting on July 3rd. We know that the updated information that we put out yesterday has caused additional questions and for some uncertainty to many who've already been traumatized by this atrocity. I assure you that we will leave no stone unturned in our pursuit of justice in this investigation, and we continue to keep everyone uplifted in prayer. DC Vanore, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. So, as the Commissioner said, I just want to put a little bit of a timeline to the investigative work that was done and how we uncovered what we uncovered now. So, on the night of the 3rd, we know the police responded. It was horrific and chaotic scene. 4 homicide victims were discovered, along with 2 other shooting victims, and crime scenes were developed, and detectives responded to the scene. Now, at that time, we had a suspect in custody. But that still doesn't mean that it's over. That investigation really just began, and the Commissioner said it that night, and it was said repeatedly the next day. So detectives continued this investigation. About 3 hours, 45 minutes later, we received information from a family member that Mr. Wamba was inside the property. Officers entered and found a crime scene, they found that he was deceased, and he became the 5th victim that night. It was apparent that night, and not much was, that the same firearm was used, and the casings looked the same, and so he was held as part of that incident. So as detectives continued to investigate this incident, they now needed to gather the ballistic evidence, forensic evidence. We needed to transport the deceased to the ME's office and begin our investigation. And that was done, and that took a long time. In the days that followed, detectives went block by block, and as we do in many of these cases, we find video that we could piece together. All right, the video they found was a good 10 minutes of video that they were able to put together. We see the defendant in several of the blocks discharging his weapon. We only see a couple of the shooting victims that are shot, all right, and other shooting victims are out of the camera view. But we couldn't explain, and we had camera shots of in front of in the 1600 block of South 56th when the defendant entered and did that shooting. There were too many questions at that point. So detectives went back out, especially on Friday, and they began to knock at doors to see if they can gather more information. They encountered a witness who said, "I heard gunshots that I believe were coming from inside 16, I believe it's 25, South 56th Street." So at that point, but they said it was Sunday and it was 12:30 a.m. So at this point, now we had to corroborate that. This person did not call 911. So that detective was not the assigned, it's more our technology detectives. So he had to relay that to the assigned detective, who relayed it to the district attorney. Now the district attorney began to help us try to collaborate, so they called the ME's office. The ME was able to tell us at that point, obviously all the reports weren't completed, that Mr. Wamba, we believed his time at desk was 30 to 34 hours before the others. That gave us now corroboration that something occurred on Sunday. So more detectives went out to the location, and we encountered other witnesses. One of those witnesses did say that they called 911, but at that point we could not find the call. We looked up and down. There were no calls that we could corroborate on the 1600 block of South 56 on Sunday. That's when we asked to see their phone, we checked the call log, and then we were able to connect exactly what number called, and we found out that the mistake was made as the commissioner described, and those units responded to North 56th and not South 56th. Once we had that information, we were able to go look for video at the exact time, and we did find video of the homicide on Sunday, where he goes to the door, and most of what occurs is inside. You don't see it, but he does shoot and enter into the property. So it is the same defendant. We know it's Kim Brady Kerringer, but it did not happen on Monday. It happened on Sunday. So we are continuing to collect evidence. We're not done. It just shows that it's not an open and shut case because there's an arrest. We constantly look for corroborating information. If it's not there, we look for witnesses, we look for video, anything that we could corroborate, because this case is still going to go to court, and all this evidence has to be utilized for the prosecution.
So that woman said she called 911 dispatch twice, no one answered, and then she received a call back from 215-686-3128. Can you confirm that, and who actually called her back?
So there was a callback. I would probably leave that to our radio, which doesn't happen to me. But there, 2 a.m., which is an hour and a half after we know this happened, there is a call. So hour and a half later, so the officers go up there. She's claiming that, she believes she's seen the shooting, and she wants someone to respond there. And the officers, she has a conversation with someone at the scene. I don't know about the 686. If radio called, but I'd have to corroborate that. I'm not sure.
She says she called twice and no one answered. And then she received a 206, which I checked her phone records, and received a call back from that 215-686-3128, and that's where she begins to discuss and relay what's happened 5 minutes earlier.
I'm going to let Deputy Commissioner Doc Campbell answer those questions for radio.
Okay.
Good afternoon. So the original call that came in was listed as a hang-up. Right after that call was made, that individual called back. at which point the call taker took the information, it was sent to dispatch, and dispatch was sent out an officer from the 19th district to check the north 56th Street, not south 56th Street. The call back was a supervisor call. So supervisor called to speak to the complainant to try and figure out where the location was. When they spoke to each other, there was no mention of direction of north or south, just stating that it was on the 1600 block. So that supervisor continued to have the officers check that block, looking to see if they saw anything, which of course turned out to not be the correct block, but at the time that was not known.
My question is for Commissioner Outlaw for a moment. What's your response to the reaction by some, by many perhaps in the neighborhood? What's your response to the reaction that what happened Monday could have been prevented if this mistake with sending the officer to the wrong location didn't happen?
I caution individuals to go down that rabbit hole. We can woulda, coulda, shoulda all day. I mean, obviously, this new bit of information just adds or compounds the tragedy that already occurred. It doesn't make any of us up here feel better. But the fact of the matter is that the phone call that we received was an hour and a half after the shooting occurred. Had we gone to the correct location within the short amount of time, or within receiving that dispatch, unfortunately, due to the nature of Mr. Wama's injuries, more than likely he would not have been alive at the time, given that the nature of the injuries were so severe. And the suspect or the defendant description that we were able to get at that time was pretty vague and fairly limited. So while it may have, hindsight is always perfect, while it may have given us an investigative lead, the likelihood of cutting that off or cutting off what happened later on, we just don't know without being in that person's mind. Again, it's tragic, it's unfortunate, and we don't like the fact that we're adding to the atrocities that already occurred, because now folks are second-guessing our actions. But the answer is we really don't know. But I don't think that this is a time to say, well, we shouldn't trust the police department because we did what we could with what we had. And yes, there were some missteps. But I think this is also, I think it was mentioned last week, an opportunity for everyone to step up and report immediately when they know something. I mean, we're reactive. We were reactive in this situation, and unfortunately, we do know that there were some that were around the suspect prior to this happening that maybe could have reported some of the information that was known to them, and maybe then this could have prevented this from happening. But even then, we don't know. We don't know.
The woman said that she was on the phone with what apparently was the supervisor, and the supervisor said, "We're out there," and she says she clearly told him, "No, you're not." And so, how was there not more follow-up? Because she's saying she's seen a guy shooting through the door and running down the street.
Well,
I know it's an hour and a half later.
Yeah, well, there was follow-up, and again, there is an internal investigation into an administrative investigation into what happened there. So I don't have all the answers for you. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking to ensure that we have fail-safes in place to prevent this from happening again. For example, if there is a priority one call before it's closed out as unfounded, we have a higher ranking person review it to ensure that it is in fact unfounded, to make sure that we've exhausted all measures. But this is just unfortunate all across the board.
Can you elaborate on the timeline of events when Carricker allegedly approaches Wama's door at 12:30?
Sure.
Yeah, we know that there's an encounter at the door. I don't know if there's a knock but there's ballistic evidence in the grass, a little bit on the porch, and then at least 4 casings inside the house. So
Video or no?
we do have video of it, yes.
Did he shoot?
I have not seen
Did
it.
he shoot through the door? Because there were several holes in the door, and the woman who saw it, she said he fired into the door.
Chad, I would have to check that with the inspector. I'm not sure exactly the trajectory and all that. But
Deputy Commissioner Vanore, from the outset, Philadelphia police have said this was a random shooting, but given what you're seeing on the surveillance video with Joseph Wama, the suspect was shooting into
You would think it had suggested that, but at this point, investigatively, we have not connected them in any way. We don't have a motive still. We don't know why he chose that address, why he chose that individual at that time. We just don't have that answer.
The witness said that he yelled something to the fact, Sheriff, have you been able to confirm that?
Yes,
that he was acting like law enforcement?
we heard that he yelled something like sheriff right before it had happened, yes. But we just don't know what that meant or why he would have done that.
So when the officers first found Joseph Lama's body, it was 44 hours or so after he was killed. Was it not clear at the time that he was killed much earlier than the shooting occurred? I mean, that's a long time for a dead body to be sitting there decomposing.
Right, well, we get knowledge of him being there 3 hours and 45 minutes after we discovered all the rest. And that was by a family member calling us. It wasn't apparent at that time until the medical examination happened, when the time of death was approximate, and then we were able to go back and start looking for additional witnesses from Sunday, Saturday night, Sunday, instead of the Monday night where they were at this particular time.
What does the video show he was wearing? Some described he may have had like all black with like a patch that may have been like a sheriff's patch.
I think it was a mask. They're saying there was some kind of print on it, and they're saying it was some kind of clothing, dark-colored clothing. It wasn't very easily to see, but you could see he was wearing clothing like that.
Was he trying to look like law enforcement?
I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that at this
Can
point.
you talk a little bit more just about just Lama, he's in his house, you know, and all this time has transpired. Did the family, did he live alone? Did the family go there after they heard of this mass shooting and went to see if he was, I mean, how did that?
That's what I believe. He had a family member go check on him because he knew the mass shooting happened on his block, and that's when he's discovered. I think the last contact was earlier in the week via text message. He just didn't have contact with anybody
But
else.
he lives alone, nobody lives.
I don't believe anyone else lives there.
So on early Sunday morning when the 911 caller called us in, did the dispatcher not have access to her location based on her cell phone data or anything? Because I was just speaking with her and others in the block, and they're confused, you know, as to why that wasn't available.
So that's why the commissioner and the deputy said we have to figure out what happened. It is available. It's there. There's a lot of information that comes up when the caller calls. I think the conversation, they never used north or south, and an error was made. Someone placed in the wrong location without reviewing that to see in a very small print that she was in South 56.
Can you explain when a call comes in from a cell phone to dispatch, what is actually shown? Would the location be shown? Can you kind of describe what information your dispatchers would have access to once that call comes in?
So generally what will come up on the bottom is the call takers, where they're located, their address. Often there's an ability you can hit a button to have their information transferred to the screen to be sent, but generally, well, oftentimes you're not calling about yourself. So it's not your exact address, so they don't do that frequently. What they end up doing is inputting the information that they get from the caller. And in this instance, they put the correct street number and block number, but not the correct north or south. They hit the wrong.
But would north and south have automatically popped up, though?
Well, no, it's a drop-down box. And unless you automatically transfer the call maker's information, which frequently they do not do because it isn't the exact location they're calling about.
What was dispatch like that night? I mean, obviously, we had the holiday weekend. I mean, was there more calls than usual? Were you inundated with calls? Can you kind of talk about what the atmosphere was like?
I couldn't tell you exactly how many. I'd have to review it, but we do generally have 6,000 to 7,000 calls a day. They've been doing an excellent job of trying to answer those calls within the first 10 seconds, which is always their goal. And so that was the goal that evening as well. And, you know, it's unfortunately, it's summertime, it is busy, but they were getting to calls and answering 911 as they came in.
What was staffing like that night?
I'd have to review that to see exactly what the numbers were.
Hey, Cindy, last question. Thank you, Commissioner. You said it's clear that it's character in the video surveillance, correct?
We believe that it's the same individual, yes. Same ballistics used, and we believe it's the same individual.
And is it clear that it's him in the video?
It's not clear. I wouldn't have known it was him if I didn't know him now from Monday. It wasn't apparent that it was him. No, it's a person in a mask and a dark colored clothing with a rifle.
Would it, I mean, getting back to the Commissioner's point, would it have given you more than a lead on the investigation if you had discovered that video on Sunday or Monday?
Well, hindsight is 2020, but it would have been a lead. I could give you dozens and dozens of videos that I have with people with masks that we don't know who they are right now, and some of them occurred weeks ago. So we try every time we can.
Do you
but-
know where the suspect ran to after killing Mr. Wamon? Do you know where the suspect ran to as he ran down the street?
I don't have that information. Where he went, he left that location immediately.
Is the dispatcher who made the error on paid or unpaid leave?
I'll have to check into that and get back to you. It's being investigated, it's being looked at, but there, at this point, doesn't seem to be any malintent, but we're going to look and see and investigate the matter.